The gardens at Pardee House, like the Pardee House itself, are a remnant and a conscious reconstruction of an upper middle class garden and house as it existed at around the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. House was actually built in 1868 by a man named Enoch Pardee, an ophthalmologist, eye doctor in San Francisco who had made a little money in the gold rush and set himself up in practice in San Francisco, got tired of the dank weather over there and decided to find the sunniest spot he could find on the east side of the bay. This is basically a Victorian design that is adapted to a more Mediterranean subtropical climate. The layout is very formal, but has some distinctive character of its own. A couple of the trees are the original native oaks. There's a redwood that was planted that's of some antiquity. A lot of use of subtropical plants. The people who moved here were very enamored of the fact that they could grow all this stuff that in the East or in Europe could only be grown in greenhouses and conservatories. I should say a little something about George Pardee, just because I admire him so much. George was the son of Enoch, who built the house, and he also served as mayor of Oakland, and he was governor of California from 1902 to 1906. He was a member of the progressive faction of the Republican Party, which sought to make some very serious reforms in government and to get the government of California out from under the thumb of the Southern Pacific Railroad, where it had been for a long time. These progressives, after 1906, formed something called the Progressive Party, which was fairly short-lived, but Theodore Roosevelt was associated with that, and their platform, which they mostly realized, was to do things that we take for granted right now, like direct primaries, direct election of senators, ending of corruption in government, the 8-hour workday for women, which later became extended to nearly everybody, and conservation, big on conservation.
So George Pardee was a progressive governor of our state. And that's the son of the person who built this house.
He became known as the earthquake governor because he was governor during the San Francisco earthquake and exerted a lot of leadership, which ended up in relocating a lot of people from San Francisco to Oakland, and led to a building boom in Oakland. He also founded East Bay Mud, was one of the first port commissioners in Oakland, and the Pardee Dam and Reservoir in the Sierra foothills, where we get most of our water, are named after him. But let's get back to the garden. Okay. It's this pink modeling, which I think actually adds to some of the visual value of these plants. The disease is called botrytis. It's a type of fungus that also produces these, it's called downy mildew. It produces rots on grapevines. They try to control it, but they also make some nice sweet wines out of botrytis grapes, and the fungus adds to the flavor.
But on the hydrangea,
it adds to the visual interest until it starts fading. But hey, all flowers fade anyway. It can be controlled with fungicides if you want to, or it can just be considered part of the natural life cycle of the plant. Now, this is a New Zealand sword fern, and in those days they didn't much care whether anything was native or not. They made use of some native plants in the garden, certainly preserved the magnificent old oak trees, but there was not the kind of conscious use of natives that we experience today. One of the widely used subtropical plants then were cannas. This is a Mexican, Central American perennial. It's widely grown in the east, but they have to dig the tubers every year and store them in a a basement. Here in California, they could be grown year-round. And hidden among the cannas, we have a magnificent specimen of one of the weeds I teach, Epilobium canum, fireweed. It's called fireweed because the leaves tend to turn reddish in cold weather. In the mountains, it's called fireweed because it comes up in great abundance after forest fires. Keep in mind that weeds are weeds because they're plants that behave like weeds. That is, they move around very aggressively, volunteer places where you might want them or might not want them, and some of them are quite beautiful, has nothing to do with whether you like them or not. They're weeds because of their behavior. Yeah, nice sunny spot in the northeast section of the garden that is planted with large succulents and some of which include cactus. Again, it's the whole subtropical thing. Being able to have a garden that looks like a jungle or desert or exotic environment. These big agaves from central Mexico, Brugmansia, angel's trumpet is the common name, from South America, aloes from South Africa, cacti from the New World deserts. Although all the plants we use in horticulture ultimately come from the wild look was not all that popular, at least not until the later Victorian era, when the arts and crafts movement led to more naturalistic plantings. The date palm is a Canary Island date palm, which is one of the more popular palm trees that's grown around here, and that's about the tallest specimen I've ever seen. They're usually about half that height. Now, southern magnolias are another tree that were very popular. You know, back in Pardee's time, there were probably some pretty nice large specimens on this property that, you know, probably succumbed to some disease or another, and they've replanted them as part of a conscious effort to recreate the old garden. If you want to reestablish a historic garden as it was when it was created or during its heyday, an especially good and widely used source are nursery catalogs from the era. The nursery trade became established in California pretty early in our history as a state, you know, after the gold rush. By 1860, there were lots of nurseries in the Bay Area that were putting out catalogs. And that can be an especially good source of dating particular plants and varieties of plants.